My name is Danielle Chutinthranond, and this is how I create.
Welcome to This Is How We Create, a show that digs deeper into the creative life of contemporary artists of color. Discover what feeds their creativity and how they found or are finding their artistic voice. Through these intimate and candid conversations, you'll gain insights into the lives of creative professionals of color that are hard to find anywhere else. We do have adult language in this episode, so you may not want to have a listen with kiddies around.
Today on the podcast, we're chatting with Danielle Chutinthranond, who runs the ceramic studio Monsoon Pottery in Chicago. In this episode, Danielle and I chat about her journey to starting Monsoon Pottery. We talk about her process, and towards the end of our conversation, we dig deep in racism. We talk about how racism affects how we live and how we function as artists and people in the United States. I really loved my conversation with Danielle, and I hope you do too. Enjoy! Today on the show, we have Chicago-based potter Danielle Chutinthranond of Monsoon Pottery. Danielle specializes in ceramic dinnerware and housewares. She credits her inspiration to nature, classic Asian motif, Chinatown, and over everything else, restaurant and food culture. She grew up in a Thai Pacific Rim restaurant in upstate New York and learned from a very young age that food is special, personal, and becomes even more meaningful when presented with care and attention to detail. Each piece Danielle makes is focused on enhancing the beauty and ritual of your table. Essentialism and minimalism are always on her mind when creating. To that end, she believes that the objects in our homes should be useful, durable, and beautiful. In service to these beliefs, all of her work is microwave, dishwasher, and even oven safe. Thank goodness! Danielle believes beautiful doesn't have to be precious. Useful can still be romantic. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you. That was such a nice intro. Thank you for taking the time to do that.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you on. I've been a fan, as you know. So everyone,
Right.
Danielle Monsoon Pottery, Danielle of Monsoon Pottery, of course. She had an open house that my neighbor suggested that I go to. And I went in and I just really fell in love with just your work, your studio. And I walked away with several pieces. And some of them were supposed to be gifts. I kept them for myself.
I get that all the time.
Really?
I sell things to people and they're like, oh yeah, I'm buying this as a gift. And then I'll see them again at some point, or I'll follow their Instagram and I see that they still have it, or they'll tell me that they ended up keeping it. And I just love that because I think it's the ultimate compliment. But yeah, that was amazing the day we met because you came to the studio and then, you and your husband ended up staying past, the closing time, and we just had this long, amazing conversation.
So Danielle,
Yeah.
I want to dig in and talk about pottery. So you weren't always a potter. You had a different profession prior. So can you tell us about how you came to choose pottery as an art form?
I used to work in the tech industry. I was a user experience designer and researcher, and I had a history before then of being a coder. I used to write code for, enterprise software and websites as well, and then transitioned later into design. And I worked at some larger companies and then eventually to a startup, a very small startup. I gotta say that startup culture was not for me. And I think that it was kind of like the nail in the coffin on my tech career, because it never felt right the whole time anyway. Living that very, very intense life of having to work around the clock and then, having to deal with being a woman of color in the tech industry. I just felt completely psychologically depleted when I left that last job I had in the tech industry. I had to take some time off. I needed to mentally heal and really regroup and try to figure out what I wanted to do next. And that involved just taking some random classes. I feel like that's always kind of what I do when I'm exploring new things in my life. I look at adult education classes or community classes, and this one at Lil Street caught my eye, the ceramics class, and I ended up going. And I mean, after that first class, I was just totally hooked. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like, I can't wait to figure out how to make like this thing that I want in my house or this thing that I want in my house. And I was just so dedicated to figuring out the skills and honing those skills and practicing every day. I mean, I wasn't working at the time either. So there's something about ceramics too that's one of the more healing art forms, I think. And where I was at that time in my life, I feel like I really needed it. You know, I'm not sure if I would have gone all the way with it unless those were the circumstances under which I found it.
Did you choose ceramics or did ceramics choose you?
I feel like it was kind of a combination. I have been interested in art my whole life, even though I've had different careers and, you know, I've studied different things. Like, you know, in college, I studied physics, and a lot of people think that that's like the opposite of art. But I don't know. I never really was one of those people either that kind of subscribed to the idea that there's like, oh, you know how people say like left brain, right brain people or whatever? Like, I think all of that's just kind of bullshit. Like, I think it's kind of a rubric that people fall into when they feel they're just more comfortable labeling themselves. But I think everyone has the capacity to draw from each. To that end, I mean, like, I was always really interested in art, but I don't think I discovered until later in life that I was more interested in 3D art than 2D art. I think a lot of artists too go through this where they kind of try both, and, you know, some are gifted, equally gifted at both, and, you know, are interdisciplinary in that way. But even though I could do a lot of 2D art, I never really liked it that much. And so I think that's kind of something that kept me away from art for a lot of my life too, is that I never really got to experience fully a 3D art form that I wanted to immerse in. And, you know, I think ceramics too connects to my background in food and restaurants and presenting food, and just growing up in that way. And because I had that interest, I was more interested in ceramics because of it. Because I was like, oh, there's all this cool dinnerware that I have in my head that, you know, is connected to these dishes that I serve, and these dishes that I cook and make. And so,
and as you were talking about the difference between 2D art and 3D art and which way you wanted to go, I can see why you chose ceramics, because working in a restaurant, you go from, you have an ingredient and you work with that ingredient to create something at the end, right? So you create, you know, you have several ingredients and then you have a dish at the end. It seems to me that's what the clay is like, right? That's, the clay is the ingredient. At the end, you have a dish. So
right.
It's fitting.
Right. Yeah. There was this really unique harmony that was very satisfying to me, to kind of put together a dish that I love to make and then put it in a vessel that in my mind matched it perfectly. Because when this was happening, I guess like 4 years ago or 5 years ago, I think, when I started getting into this and I was taking a break, you know, I've cooked my whole life. And so when I was taking that time off, I got back into cooking again, and then became more interested in food photography as well. So I think all these influences just kind of combined into the perfect storm, because I was trying to have fun with that too, like making my food and plating it and photographing it, and then saying like, oh, like this plate that I got from Crate and Barrel actually is kind of shitty, and I would like to make my own. Everything came together perfectly.
I would think that your background in with food is one of the reasons why you decided to focus on dinnerware and houseware. Was that always the direction you wanted to go, or were you thinking of something else at first?
When I discovered Lil Street and I was walking through that ceramic studio and I was seeing work that other people were creating, I was immediately drawn to the functional work, and especially the work that was meant to be dinnerware. I feel like I think about sculpture, or I don't know, just any kind of like purely decorative objects as something that I don't really have a personal connection to those types of objects. And I think it's because of how meaningful food and restaurant life has been to me that I sort of had tunnel vision for dinnerware. I just couldn't imagine myself making anything else.
And if anyone's been around food as long as you have, then you would have seen so many types of dinnerware, I would think, right?
restaurant
Oh,
grade,
yeah.
just consumer grade. Seems like you have a very distinct style. Can you talk to us a little bit about your style?
When you were mentioning, like, I must have seen a lot of dinnerware in my life, like, you're absolutely right. And, part of growing up with my parents being restaurateurs is that some of the only cultural, well, actually, I think pretty exclusively, the only cultural experiences that we really had it was going to restaurants. My parents aren't really big on museums, or I don't know, they're just not that enthusiastic about museums or plays or like that kind of thing, or, seeing live music or anything. So when we did stuff together as a family, like for vacation or whatever, it was always about going to different restaurants, experiencing different cuisines from different people. And then my parents own, it used to be way more fine dining than it is now, but they have an interest in fine dining. And so going to some of these crazy restaurants with them and seeing, in some instances, these crazy multi-course meals where maybe an artist even designed, a piece to hold a specific course. That was always something that really resonated with me. I always thought that was so cool. And, isn't that the ultimate collaboration to just say, oh, what are you making? Oh, I know the perfect thing to put that in, or to just make it really sing on the plate and then also enhance the eating experience. I don't know. I feel like my style is really influenced by taking that path and kind of seeing all the different things there are out there. And then also just getting kind of, I don't know, just like getting older and like not really being into that kind of thing anymore. Like, I feel like, now that I'm grown up and I know that like haute cuisine is a very exclusive male world. And, I don't actually have a ton of fun if I'm like more than 2 hours into a meal. And I know that there's probably 2 more hours and I'm already full and it's stuffy and it's a drag. And, so I think for a little while I thought like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to like do stuff like that? But then I thought, that's not really how I like to live my life. I like these eating experiences that are more communal, that are more fun, that are more bright and lively and less stuffy. I remember eating at Alinea one time, like years and years and years ago. And I know this is controversial to say, but I just like fucking hated it. Like, I thought it was so stuffy and like austere. And, the point was to admire the food and have this like reverence towards the food. And like that's not what eating is about to me. It's about sharing. It's about sharing like amazing food with people that you love. And I think that shows through my work, having these pieces that are, I don't know, I do make like individual plates or whatever, but you won't really see like huge traditional dinnerware in my line. Like I don't make those 10-inch dinner plates or whatever. Like I do have some dinnerware, but the plates are smaller. They're about like 9 inches, but it's to promote that sort of mentality of, I just don't like going to restaurants and then people being like, well, I want to order like my own entree and you can have yours and like, we're not going to share. And that's just, it's not very Asian.
That's so interesting that you said that because I feel the same way. For a while, we had the Michelin guide. So like we would go to all of the however many star restaurants there was one time we went to Fleur de Lis, which was in San Francisco. It's since closed, where we would go to Bouchon. Like we would go to all the shishi restaurants all around the world.
Right.
And then I realized, okay, the food's good, but I'm not having fun. And it took me a while to figure out, why am I not having fun? And I think the reason why I wasn't having fun is because it was too shishi.
I think I sort of came to this conclusion that like it's glorifying the chef and their vision and what they want to do, which, I think is its own art form. And I think that for me, I just separated in my head as like, oh, these people are creating art and it's meant to be observed and revered and enjoyed or whatever. But I just like a more fun restaurant.
I do too. And I think going back to the communal aspect, I'm growing up in Haiti, it's drilled into me that everything's about sharing, everything's about being together with friends and family. And I always felt that because those restaurants were so exclusive, it was
Right.
only for a certain type of people. And you had to follow the strict code. Like you couldn't really share plates. Like it was just too stuffy. And we haven't really gone to super fancy restaurants in a long time because I like the mom and pop restaurants. I like it when it's really informal, and I like that aspect of it where you can pass your plate, where you can share.
Right. And I think that it's easier to make connections at places like that too, because if you go to, a super multi-course meal that's very high end, I get the sense that no one really cares what you think about the food, or, they don't really want to get to know you as a patron. And not to say that the point of going to a restaurant is to get recognition as a patron or anything like that. But I do think that being able to have a genuine connection with someone who takes pride in their work and, I don't know, isn't like up their own ass about their vision is just so much more enjoyable.
Since you've said that, I do feel like your work is really beautiful. Your pieces are gorgeous, but they're not precious either. And yeah, and in reading your bio, I was really I was so happy that you said that, your work, your dishware you could put it in the microwave, you could put it in the dishwasher, and you could put it in the oven. And I have to tell you, like, we have some fine china, bone china dinnerware that we can't do anything with it. It just
Right.
doesn't fit. And they're pretty,
Right.
but they're so inconvenient to use. And so I really appreciate that aspect of your work. And did you go into, when you were designing your lines, did you go into thinking that this is what you wanted?
Sure. I mean, I think, again, it's that restaurant background of just thinking like, oh, if this isn't durable, it's not actually useful at all. Or, like I don't like the idea of someone buying a plate and being like, oh, I'm too afraid to use it. No, just use it. I don't know. I think that's my nightmare is having someone buy a functional piece for me and then to never use it. It just feels so incomplete at that point. I wanted my work to be functional because, I mean, that's just the kind of, I don't know, just like me living at home and just wanting to put everything in the microwave, wanting to put everything in the dishwasher. I don't know, I didn't think that my work would be something that I couldn't use in the way that I want to use, if that makes sense.
I completely understand. So at this point, I thought we could go back to talking about your process. Can you walk me through how you come to creating? In having that conversation, I'd love to know about starting with the basics in terms of your clay, the type of clay you use. And I know not much about clay. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you choose your ingredient, because I would think that you need to have a certain outcome at the end. And how do you end up finding the ingredients that you need to use to have the outcome that you do want?
Usually I don't talk about this unless people ask because it's super technical. And I find that a lot of people are just like, oh my God, please stop talking about this.
But give it to us. I want to know.
Yeah. No, I'm so happy you asked. Clay selection is really important if you want to make a really durable product. And I think also, I prototyped a lot of dinnerware early on and I gave it to my parents to use in their restaurants just as like kind of stress testing too. There's some controversy about this in the clay world, but I do happen to believe that if you fire clay to cone 10, which is the higher end of temperatures that you can fire functional work at, I do think that it makes it more durable. I think most ceramic art that you'll see from independent makers out there is fired to cone 6. And that's for energy efficiency and whatnot. I mean, the two temperatures are not actually that different themselves. Like there's a really small gap in the temperatures. If you just take it a little bit higher to cone 10, I think it does make the work more durable. Cone 10 is 2,350 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's why people are like, oh, can I put this in the oven? I'm like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Like, it was already like so freaking hot before. And then it was also intact when the cone was cooling. And, you know, sometimes I'll even crack it when it's at 500 degrees because I'm just like, all right, I'm on the deadline here. I got to get these pieces out. Ceramic firing temperatures are insanely high. On that note, there's a division in the clays that you buy. So you buy them based off of the firing temperature. So I buy only Cone 10 clays, but then another metric that I look at when I'm buying clays is something called absorption rate. What they do is they'll take a slab of clay usually to measure this, and they'll immerse it completely in water, and they weigh it before and they weigh it after, and they see what percentage absorption is based off of like the difference in weights, meaning how much water it absorbs. Porous clays are less durable, so if it absorbs more water, it means that, yeah, it's kind of like spongy in that way, if you can imagine like vitrified clay as being spongy. Basically, I look for stuff that's 3% or lower. And that's one of the reasons why I love porcelain so much, because the absorption rate is 1% or less when you fire it at Cone 10. And so it is super, super, super strong. And so, I mean, I think that if you've done any sort of like house renovations that involve like tile or kitchen or whatever, manufacturers will suggest porcelain a lot because it is super, super durable. Dinnerware needs to take a beating and not break. I mean, breaks do happen still, but I feel like, yeah, when I select my, as you call them, ingredients, which I love the way you put that, those are the main things that I look for in clay. I don't know, I test a lot of clays too, and sometimes it just comes down to like, even if they meet those parameters, if I don't like the way it feels on the wheel, like I'm just not going to use it either. So I like porcelain for that reason too.
Do you mean that if you don't like the way the clay feels on the wheel, or do you mean that as you're working and you're producing whatever product you're producing, if you don't like the product, you won't use it?
I mean, I think it's both. Yeah, like if it fires up and it's like a weird color or something, or not the color that I wanted it to, or if it's not interacting with glazes in a way that's making the beauty of it shine through optimally, I'm probably not going to use it. But then also, yeah, just like the way it feels on the wheel in my hands, and, you know, if I find it hard to manipulate, I'm probably not going to use it. But I mean, that comes with varying effects and stuff that come up on the wheel. Like, so one of the reasons I like porcelain so much is because it has no grog in it at all.
What does that mean?
Grog, so grog is, it's something that you put into clay to give it more structural integrity when it's wet. And what it is it's clay that's been fired and then pulverized and then put back into the clay body. So it's kind of like really, really fine sand or gravel. And stoneware has a good amount of grog in it. And I don't know, it just depends on the kind of clays that you want to use. And like, if you want to buy a clay that's going to help you build things that are really, really tall, you want a clay with a lot of grog in it because it's going to help the clay stand up. So, I mean, there's different kinds of clays depending on the different things that you want to do. But I really like porcelain because it kind of just feels like cream cheese. It's super smooth.
Of course, you have a food reference, cream cheese.
Yeah.
At what point during you taking classes at Little Street did you decide that you wanted to open your own studio?
I think it was a year after I started taking classes that I started my website. And then at that point, I knew I had a plan to have a home studio. But I think it's because I had that background in the starting a business, like the barriers to starting a business didn't really seem that high to me because I knew I could create my own website. I had worked with design before. I knew that I could just get the branding together on my own. You know, I know how to use design software. I knew that I could create all of my stickers and like a logo and like whatever. Like, I knew that I could do all that stuff on my own. I was more intimidated by the fact that I was still on this pottery journey and thinking, you know, am I good enough to do this yet? You know, again, I was in this headspace of, well, I don't want to do what I was doing before, so I may as well go all in on this.
What was the catalyst though for you to make that decision? I mean, I know that you were not happy in what you were doing before, but you probably could have gotten a new job. At what point did you decide that, no, this is for me, I'm gonna do it?
I think I just decided because I knew, I did apply to another job and I had one in the pipeline. And then I terminated my interview process because I was just thinking, I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't go back and do this. And, it seemed the people who I was interviewing with, it seemed like it would be different. It seemed like it would be like it was in a larger company and they wanted like a little incubator within their own company. And so I was like, oh, there's corporate culture, I'll be protected. Like, so, that wasn't a factor of like, it's not like I would have jumped back into some startup with like a narcissistic founder or something like that. I didn't want to do it anymore.
You said a word that I'm really curious about. You said that, oh, it's a corporate culture, I'll be protected. What do you mean by protected?
Oh, yeah. So when you work for startups and like smaller tech companies, there's no HR. So you have to sort of figure that stuff out on your own. And there isn't a third party to be like, oh, is this conflict that's happening between you and another person? Like, there's no mediator. And so if that person is in a higher position than you, it doesn't matter if you have a point.
Got it.
So I felt like I had worked for one really large corporation before I got into sort of smaller companies or like later stage startups, and then, ending up being like part of the founding team of a startup, that when I was working at that corporate job with the HR department and everything, I felt like more protected at that job because there was a whole department of people whose job it was to, hold people accountable. When I was thinking about going back to the tech industry, that was really important to me, to go to a place that had something like that in place. So yeah, that wasn't a factor in like not going back, because I was like, oh, there's jobs in this industry that don't suck. But, I always just like felt burned out and like, it just never felt right. But having my own business, executing my own creative vision, doing something that's really personal to me, and, being able to call the shots on like, oh, is this bowl perfect for noodles, or like what, like those are the decisions that I feel really confident making and saying with authority, like, yeah, I think this one's a little off, so we're going to smash it.
That makes a lot of sense. Because of your startup knowledge and your experience in having worked in a startup, I'm assuming that when you started your studio, that you were very clear as to what your why was, right?
Right.
Because in reading your bio, you are just really clear about communicating who you are as a person, communicating your style, your inspiration, as well as your voice. Did you always have such a clear understanding as to the DNA of Monsoon Pottery, or did that come over time?
A lot of it is just me as an artist. I named it Monsoon Pottery because I have an impossible last name that people can't spell. If I wanted to sell my art under my name, I think it would be really hard to find me for that reason, which is why I knew I had to pick some other branded name. Monsoon Pottery really is just me. I feel like, my art is evolving in different ways. Like, I'm incorporating more surface design now than I was in the beginning, which has been kind of a surprise to me. I guess it's like I didn't set up necessarily a brand to hold myself steadfast to in terms of like whatever the identity was that I created initially. I think that I do still want to hold on to those values of like, yeah, it should be durable, it should be beautiful, but I think there's a lot of room to play too.
In preparation for this conversation, I did a bit of research into traditional Thai pottery.
Oh, nice.
Because I was like, I want to look to see what traditional Thai pottery is all about. And I wonder if this has influenced Danielle in one way or another, because sometimes we really when we have to think about our culture and how it influences what we do on the everyday or even our businesses, we can't always pinpoint to it, right? Because it's
Right.
just it's who we are. Can you tell us a little bit about how you incorporate your culture in your work, or do
For
you?
sure. I would say I do and I don't. I think that, yeah, that's a great question because for our listeners who are probably not familiar with the traditions of Thai ceramics, there's a couple different ones. I feel like the one that I connect more to is the Celadon tradition. Celadon production has always been huge in northern Thailand, and I do love the look of Celadon. Celadon glazes are traditionally, it's something that's fired in a reduction environment kiln. And so what that is it's a gas kiln. So I have an electric kiln. The big difference between those is the firing environment. So gas is what we call a reduction environment, meaning it's an oxygen poor environment. And then my electric kiln is an oxidation environment. And so that's an oxygen rich one. And so there are a lot of, in my opinion, like cooler things that happen in reduction. But, for someone who has a kiln in a city, I looked into this. I think it would have cost me tens of thousands of dollars to like dig up a pipeline to like hook up to, it would have been like a nightmare and like permits and like city of Chicago is always just trying to make a buck. So, like that would have been so expensive and such a nightmare. So an electric kiln was way easier, but Celadon is traditionally fired in a reduction environment. And so you'll see a lot of like potters who have electric kilns trying to make these mock Celadon glazes, which is, you'll get like that green or like that slightly green, bluish, teal color of Celadon by adding colorants rather than allowing that to sort of happen through firing a specific Celadon glaze in an oxygen poor environment. I love Celadon. I love the crackle quality of it. I love the color of it and the fact that it's used in a lot of functional wear in addition to decorative wear. There's like another type of traditional Thai ceramics that I sort of connect less to, but it's called bencherong. Did you see that in your research? It's like the 5 colors.
No, I didn't see that one.
It's like I think it's mostly made for like high court or just like people who were really rich. It was kind of like a signifier of their wealth. And you would have to include these specific 5 colors. And then a lot of the time they would put luster on it too. So there was like a gold element, but it's just like a little extra for me. It's just, I don't know. I don't usually like more than like 1 or 2 colors on my pot. That Thai tradition is it's a little much visually. Yeah, like in terms of how much I pull from Thai culture, I don't know if I could really quantify it, but I will say that when I think about what my quote unquote culture is, it's less Thai and it's more Asian American. And I think what I mean by that is that, I was born here and I grew up here and I grew up in a mostly white school. And I was always reminded of how different I was. And I feel like once I moved to Chicago and I started making more friends who were more diverse, I just instantly felt connected to anyone else who was also Asian American. Whereas, maybe my parents' generation, they grew up in Thailand. They grew up in a homogenous society and then they immigrated here. To them, it's like, if I say, like, I have a friend from like Vietnam or Laos or like China or Korea, like they have opinions about all these other Asian countries and like the people, like I think that if you grow up over there, it's like you have opinions about all other Asians, right? Since I grew up here, I don't feel that same level of separation from people from those other countries that, maybe my parents do. I feel more connected. And so for that reason, I think that's kind of why I pull so freely from China, Japan, Korea, like any kind of Asian artist who's, any kind of country that has a strong ceramic tradition. I instantly feel connected to that because I'm Asian American. I think that's like I think that's unique to having grown up here. for sure.
I agree with you because I grew up in the Caribbean, and Haitians they have opinions about non-Haitians, right? Especially
Right,
non-Black
yeah.
Haitians. And so coming to the US, because you're Asian, they just group all of you together, right? So
Oh, for sure.
all Asians are grouped together, and then all Blacks are grouped together. And so I have friends from all over the African diaspora. However, my mother, I can't say she does. She just has
Right.
Haitian, mostly just Haitian family and friends. So it's just, I think it is a function of living in the US, isn't it?
It totally is. Yeah. I mean, because it's like if they group us all together, it's like, what are we going to do? Just like emphasize the differences between us? No, we're just going to band together and say, like, oh, you're Asian too. So like there are things that we notice the things that are similar across our cultures, not the things that are different. And then the things that are different, we're fascinated by. It's not something that we use as a means to separate ourselves from each other. And so, yeah, just growing up a minority, I think that's how you end up thinking about it. And so I feel like I pull a lot from, like, for forms, I pull a lot from Japan and Korea. For surface design, I pull a lot from like traditional Chinese motifs and, Ming Dynasty decorations. I love etching on my pots. I love like symbolism of Asian motifs, which is mostly rooted in China. I don't know, but I love Chinatown culture in general too. So like, and I mean like Chinatown. So when I say in my bio that I'm interested and influenced by Chinatown, I don't just mean like Chinatown in Chicago or New York. I mean like Bangkok Chinatown, a Chinatown that's in like Yokohama,
You
like
have to tell me more. Tell me more about that, because my sister travels a lot, and so she's been all over Asia, right? And I mean northern, southeast, everywhere. But I have yet to go to Bangkok, but I'd love to hear what Bangkok Chinatown is like.
Oh my God, Bangkok Chinatown is awesome. It's like so big. It's one of the greatest parts of the city, I think. And then it just comes alive at night, and there's so much street food everywhere. And now there's like all these independent bars and stuff opening there. And like now there's more hotels there than there have been before. But it's just like the best place to eat. I love Thai Chinese food too. So there's like, I just love the fact that
there's Thai Chinese food. What?
Yeah.
I'm missing out.
Oh my God, it's like one of the best sub cuisines, the Thai cuisine. I really wish that, the United States would kind of like catch up with Thai Chinese food, because it's a whole cuisine and it's awesome. But yeah, there's like some Thai Chinese food in Chinatown, but then there's also just like the traditional foods that the Chinese immigrants who came originally to Thailand, like they're still keeping those traditions in place, but like maybe you can't find that food a lot of other places anymore. That kind of aspect to it is really interesting. And even going to Chinatowns in London or Paris or something, it's really cool to see visually what they've selected to identify their Chineseness. I just am so fascinated by that, and am always like researching, oh, what does it mean to be Chinese here or there? Or because to me, again, as an Asian American, I'm seeing that as a proxy of how are you representing your Asianness? Even in the pots that I make that aren't like, they don't have some sort of very overtly Asian decoration on the surface, I still think that if you're familiar with like these cultures, you can see in the forms that they are intrinsically Asian as well. But I think that that's like one of the secret layers in the work, where the more you know, the more you see, kind of. But you can appreciate it without knowing it. But I love like hiding that kind of stuff in there.
How can I love you more? Oh my gosh, Danielle, that's amazing. I feel I was on your website, and I subscribed to. I think I have one of your subscriptions. I don't remember which.
You got a double of the libations and decor. And so that's like the entry level subscription, but it's also categorized. Like if you're not as into cooking, there's not like an emphasis on it being specifically dinnerware for every single shipment. But yeah, then there's an entertainer one, which is another step above in terms of price. And then that's like very much focused on people who cook. And, you know, the stuff I'm making for that this month is, well, this quarter, I should say, is I recently got into this flameware clay. It's a special clay I found that you can put it on a direct flame. I'm making like little cazuela style vessels with it where you can put it on your stove, or like what I'm really thinking is like if you're out grilling, you can just put it on your grill and like heat something up that's gonna fall through the grate, like right on the grill next to the stuff that you're grilling. Like that's the kind of stuff that's more of an emphasis on people who are into cooking and food preparation. And then there's another one where it's like, oh, you just moved into a new house and you just want me to send you like everything that you need, like sign up for that other one.
Just so that our listeners know that one of the ways that you can support Monsoon Pottery and Danielle's business is through her subscriptions, but that's not the only way to support Danielle, right? So Danielle, this is always interesting to me because we, as artists, we're running a business, right? And we want people to engage with our work and to buy in one capacity or another. Are subscriptions the most popular ways that people purchase from you?
No, actually, it's only a small part of my business right now, but I would love to see it grow. I think the most popular way, well, now that, you know, COVID is a thing, it used to be through my open studios that was like the most common way that people supported me, but now it's just through online sales. And so my advice would be just go online, see what there is, and then, you know, if it's in stock, go ahead and buy it. I recently stopped my commission work because I'm just finding that it's not a good fit for me as an artist specifically. I do get a lot of inquiries from people who want me to make custom work for them. I'm not doing that anymore, and it's kind of not the best way to support me. So I think that, you know, when people have the thought of like, oh, I really want to support this artist, let me commission some work from them. For me, that isn't always the best way. I think the best way is to see if there's anything that speaks to you online. And if there is, you know, go ahead and buy that, but then maybe just wait and see if there's something in the future that comes out.
Can you say why you've stopped taking commissions?
I'm finding that for me, being an artist is, and also I think it's like my personality too. My studio assistant got me really into, you know, the Enneagram thing. It's like the numbers for the personalities. Anyway, I didn't know anything about it. I still don't really know anything about it, but she had me take the test because she's really into it. And it turns out that I'm a 1.
Oh,
Is that So Emily, my studio assistant, she was telling me that means that I, quote unquote, live and die by my values. You know, that made a lot of sense to me. And I think the nature of commission work is that, you know, a client comes to you and they say that they want something that you're not already making. You know, you kind of go through that process with them. And there's the mental aspect of it, which is that I think it's kind of just harder for me psychologically to make work that, this sounds terrible, but it's like kind of a collaboration, because I think my work is the strongest when I just do whatever I want to do, because it's harder for me to understand if the work is right, or just sort of understand when to stop with it. If it's supposed to be pleasing someone else in a way, it's like I'm a little bit more lost in that respect. And then that makes the work harder for me to do. And then, I mean, the non-mental aspects that sort of make commissions not make sense for me is that stuff goes wrong all the time in pottery. So, you know, I can make 5 dishes or something like that. And then for some reason, the way, you know, the humidity in the air on the day that I'm trying to dry them, maybe it's too low, and then they dry too fast. And then they all end up having S cracks on the bottom of them, and then they're not perfect anymore. And then I have to remake them. It's the idea that you have to deliver something specific to someone. And I don't think that people fully understand also how long it takes, especially for me. Like, I have a huge kiln, so it takes me a really long time to fill it up. When someone orders a commission of like 1 bowl or something, I don't make 1 bowl. I make 2 or 3. And then if they all turn out well, I still have to sell the other 1 or 2. And so then that creates another problem for me in terms of streamlining my collection, which is, I think that I think I need to like re-merchandise a lot of my products in terms of like grouping them into cohesive collections, And I think that, sort of doing these one-off commissions creates a lot of work that doesn't really fit in. And that's kind of hard for me from a brand perspective. It's just a lot of extra work to promise something to someone, because then I always make more.
That makes a lot of sense. As you were chatting and you were talking about the size of your kiln and how you have to fill it, it made me think about what your process is like. Yes, what is the capacity of your kiln first and foremost?
21 cubic feet, which is on the extremely large side. We live in like this row house in Chicago, and kind of a perfect setup for a studio.
Earlier on, we were talking about color, and I would love to chat about how you decide on your colors, because I noticed that you have a gradient, if you will. You have very specific colors that you repeat over and over. There's this green, I think last time I was at your studio, there was this green that you had that was just this kind of, I can't describe it, but I've always been drawn to that one. And eventually you'll see an order come in from me. But then obviously you have a lot of white, you use some grays. Can you talk to us about some of the colors that you use in your work?
That green that you're talking about, I think that's everyone's favorite. Anything I glaze in that green tends to do pretty well. It looks kind of like a beetle color to me. And so sometimes you'll see it named as like Monsoon green or beetle green. But then, as that relates to the other colors and stuff that I use, I feel like I'm always thinking about it in terms of how it relates back to nature. Another example would be, it's a glaze I developed for Parachute Restaurant. They wanted something kind of like earth tone for these dishes I was making for them. And then I ended up making glaze called shimeji. It's the exact same shade as a shimeji mushroom, which is like a common mushroom that you'll find in like Asian grocery stores, and like we use them for hot pots and stuff all the time. I made these glacial mugs recently where it's a two-tone thing where it's white into this green, but where they intersect, it makes this really, really amazing tealish green. I grew up in upstate New York, and there's a state park near my parents' house called Green Lake. And there are these lakes formed by these glaciers that melted, and they have this really beautiful green hue. That's kind of what reminded me. I'm always thinking about like, oh, is this something that exists in nature? And that's kind of my compass for colors and glazes.
That's how you decide on your colors for ceramics. I thought that it was the clay. It was the color of the clay that determined what color the vessel would be.
Yeah.
Thanks for educating me.
Yeah, I mean, the colors of the clays interact with the glazes differently too. So like I'll use the same glaze on different clays and they'll look totally different too. But they definitely pop more on porcelain.
Danielle, we're coming to the end of our interview. I wanted to check in with you on how you're doing during this time. So we are coming off COVID, though for how long we don't know. And we're going through a new civil rights movement. There's been quite a bit of unrest in our country, justifiably, because of the death of so many Black men and women by the police, or I should say killing of many Black men and women by the police, not just death. A while ago, we had a conversation and you had mentioned that because of COVID, you were experiencing quite a bit of racism with people being racist. There's no other word for it. Racist.
Totally. I mean, and I look very Chinese too. And, even though I'm Thai, that doesn't matter. I mean, I'm honestly like with this civil rights movement that's happening, like, I'm fine. I feel like I'm seeing everything that's happening to our Black communities. And it's just, I mean, I don't know. I just feel like it's so much worse than anything that I'll ever have to experience. And I just think it's really important for Asian people to kind of step up right now and to sort of recognize our position in society, because we occupy a really unique space in the respect that there are conditions under which white society does accept us. But on the other hand, we're always going to look different. And because of that, we are always treated differently. I feel like I don't know. I almost feel weird like talking about my experiences now because I feel like Black people, Indigenous people, they have it so much worse than I do.
I see that we're not treated equally, right? Whether
Right.
you're an Indigenous person living in the US, or I don't know, if you're from Ethiopia, like everyone is treated unfairly. And I was telling you how I was watching PBS's documentary on Asians in America, and how
Right. Yeah.
I love it. And I think one of the things I don't know much about is I don't know how much Asian Americans have contributed to our nation, right? It's as if their contributions have been erased. And actually there's this episode in that documentary. So the Chinese were very responsible for helping to build the railway that connect the East Coast to the West Coast. When it came time to take a photo and to commemorate this great feat, they were excluded from that photo. They were there, but they were just excluded. And I think that history is written, and usually as history is written, and depending on who's telling the story, they erase the people who've contributed, who've done the most work. I'm very curious about your experiences, because I think the purpose of this podcast is to talk about all of our experiences.
That makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate you saying that.
And from what I remember, there was someone who was mean to you at Whole Foods.
I think that's like, when people were still a little bit skittish about going to the grocery store, understandably. And I was at the end of my shopping trip, and then I just went back to the produce section because I wanted to check for one more thing that I thought that maybe I could get. And so at that point, like maybe I was a little bit more comfortable in the store, or just like comfortable with the inevitability of some of us getting closer than 6 feet. I was kind of like stuck in between like this cooler and this other section, and I was trying to just kind of like walk past this woman in a very sort of smaller walkway. And this is a white woman, and she was wearing a mask too. She was older than me. I don't know by how much. Also, like, I think that, like Asian people tend to look younger than they are too. I feel like sometimes I get treated like I'm a young person who doesn't know anything. I mean, like, I'm 34 though, but, I'm sure maybe she thought she could talk down to me for, I don't know, for whatever reason. This was a white woman, and she just was like very aggressive in telling me, she's like, could you just back up? Like, you are way too close to me. And immediately I was like, I'm so sorry. I am too close to you. I was like, yeah, I'm sorry. Like, I was like, I was just trying to get through. She kind of doubled down, and she's like, well, you could wait. And I was like, whoa, okay. I thought this interaction was over. And she's like, you're just way too close. And she kind of did this like physical aggressive posturing towards me too. Kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, but you know how like snakes get bigger when they're about to attack? It was kind of like this lunging sort of thing that she did. And then she made a point to like make me wait behind her, and just was menacingly looking at me, and I was trapped in there. I don't know. I just felt like pure, unadulterated hatred. The way she did it was so aggressive. Just reaffirmed to me that this grocery store, Whole Foods, it's a white space. That's her space, and that's, she's telling me that I'm not behaving the right way in her space. I'm really glad that everything that's happening right now is happening. I don't know. I think that it really feels different right now in terms of how people are kind of coming forward and saying, yes, we live in a white supremacist society. And, like, we are ready to start taking responsibility for participating in that society. And, at the time that happened, I realized that I had even been conditioned to think, oh, maybe she's not racist. Maybe she's just kind of a bitch. But ultimately, it's her responsibility to understand that she's a dominant member in a white supremacist society. And that because I'm Asian, that's always going to seem racist to me. That was her space, and I needed to get out of it. I just felt like, like maybe all of her COVID stress got dumped on me all at once. I haven't been back since. It was just this one moment in time, but I can't, I still think about it. And you know what? I could guarantee you that she doesn't remember this interaction.
Probably, yeah.
I mean, I haven't gone back to that store because I'm just like, I don't want something like that to happen again. I don't want to feel hated.
I have a mini breakdown several times a year in response to racism in this country. You know, people call it microaggressions, but it doesn't feel micro to me.
No,
It doesn't
no.
at all. It's only with the calling my friends and getting support from my group that I'm able to actually weather it. It happens, I mean, it happens several times a year where it's clockwork too.
Mm.
You know, when I can feel my body is different, and I just move in the world differently. I move about my day differently because it pushes me, it weighs me down, and
Mm-hmm.
I have to go and kind of draw on the support of others in order to be able to cope. Do you have any tools or anything that you've noticed that you do in order to cope with the racism that you encounter?
I don't know. I have a question about what you just said, actually. Do you feel like you carry that weight around and it accumulates even if there isn't any kind of incident? It's just that, like clockwork, you get to a point where you've accumulated so much, even if, no one does something to you. Do you feel like that's the case? Or is it that someone does something to you like clockwork and, you have some sort of incident that you need to unpack?
There's always an incident that kind of pushes me over the edge, that tips me over. And
Yeah.
I never see, it's kind of like having a car and filling it up, but the gasoline gauge is broken.
Right.
And you know that at a certain point, you're going to have to fill it up again. But sometimes you underestimate.
Sometimes you run out of gas and you're on the freeway.
Yeah. And I have to say, I cry. And the last time it happened was when I went to a shop in Logan Square here in Chicago, and I've never gone back there since. It is, I can call it up by name. It's Park and Clay. Oh gosh.
Oh, I don't know.
Anyway, it's this restaurant in Chicago, in the Logan Square area, and I went in and I went to ask for a table, and we were going to be a party of 3. Just the reception I got tipped me over. And it just completely tipped me over. And it was such a small thing. And it didn't seem like it would be a thing that would, it didn't seem to be a thing that would tip me over, but it did. And I think what's really weird about racism in the Midwest is that it's very, very subtle. It took me a long time to figure it out because people here are really friendly.
Yeah, they are. They are. Yeah, I'm from the East Coast, so it's kind of weird that like people are so nice here. I'm just like, what's your deal? Like, yeah, I would have to agree with that. It is harder to sort of suss out, and again, like these small interactions that affect us so deeply. I think for me, it's really important to tell these stories to other people of color because I think that we've been conditioned to sort of think, oh, she's just a really mean person, or, oh, that person is probably having a bad day, or, oh, like that person probably sucks, like just forget about it. Like, I mean, and when that thing happened to me in Whole Foods, I was trying not to cry the entire time I was checking out, the entire time I was like loading up my car, and it really upset me. And, the idea that these emotions are pushed back onto us and we're meant to think like, oh, well, like she must not be racist. You must be sensitive. And I think, to your support group, I think that's a great idea. And that's kind of what I do too, is I think it helps too that, Jack, my partner, is Asian. And so like I go home and I tell him immediately, and, he completely validates that, yeah, that was racist. Like, and if she cared at all about how hard things are for Asian Americans right now, I mean, this was, I think, mid-April or something, or late April that this happened, when there was still a lot of xenophobia coming from the White House about the Chinese virus and, everything like that. Like, she should have known better than to be aggressive, even if that's in her nature. Like, that's her behavior that she should have monitored and corrected and not been that way. And I think it's really important for us to tell each other our stories and just feel validated. Society does gaslight us to an extent, to be like, oh, you're so sensitive. Like, that was such a small thing. Like, why do you care about that? I'm like, the reason you don't care about that is because you're white and that other person is white. And you can see it as just, a matter of character, not a matter of race.
And then there's the thing that it happens over and over and over again. It's never a one-off.
As an Asian American too, I feel like the racism that I experience is usually pretty aggressive in nature. And I think that has a lot to do with the model minority aspect of it, is that I've always been aware of how Asians are viewed in the society, and we're expected to be meek and quiet and keep our heads down. And I have always railed against that in how I move through the world. Like, I am not meek. I am not compliant. I'm not deferential. And I think that when I move through the world and encounter strangers who treat me like I'm supposed to be, and then they find out that I'm not, that really angers them.
Really?
And, yes. And then the responses I get, even though there's no comment about my race, that I am met with a lot of aggression. And that was something that I experienced frequently working in tech too, especially being a woman of color. I think women are also expected to be very cooperative and supportive and, again, compliant. And I think that when we don't follow through with these stereotypes, that it angers people, that they're like, why won't you get in your place? Why won't you fall in line to where your place in society on this lower rung, where I can treat you this way and I know that you're going to take it. But then if you behave in a way where you make it clear that you're not going to take it, in my experience, it's mostly met with anger and aggression. And that can be very traumatizing.
I don't know what to say. And I don't say that in a way of really dismissing what you're saying, but it's just like, I just don't understand it.
There's nothing left to say,
Well, I just don't understand how we're supposed to be. The rules keep changing.
Right. Exactly. The rules keep changing, but this stuff keeps happening, and I'm honestly never surprised by it.
Yeah, that's the thing. You're never surprised, and I'm never surprised either. But maybe we could be on each other's boards of
That's right. Yeah.
of support. Oh, yeah. I've had. Go ahead.
I'm interested in how you've been doing with, how everything's been changing around Black Lives Matter, and I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, but I'm really interested in what your experience has been. I'm learning so much about myself. I've changed so much in the last 3 weeks. In the last 3 weeks since George Floyd has died. And this is because I learned the lessons of what was expected of me as a Black woman to navigate this world. I hedged my bets. I went to the best schools because my mother. I went to the best universities, and still nothing's changed. You just think that if you do this, if you do that, if you dress like this, then if you have your hair a certain way, then they're going to treat you as an equal, but they won't, right? No.
And then I relied on being collaborative, and I realized I am done. I don't think so. And I feel like my inner child, who was a devil in some ways, my mother used to say, "You are such a difficult child." And anyone who's met me would not say that I'm difficult. My husband, maybe. Right. I am being more and more difficult because these rules are arbitrary. They're rules that you made up. I have every right to be in this world as you do.
Exactly.
Like at Whole Foods, your marketing dollars, your money is just the same color as theirs. You as a human being who can afford to shop at that overpriced store.
Right.
You have the choice to make the decision to go and shop there. I have the choice and I have the right as a human being to live in this world. I am not taking your bullshit. I'm just not.
Right.
And I refuse to subscribe. I boop unsubscribed. I'm just not doing it. And I think what will be interesting for me is when we go back to work and we're on set and we're working with people in the world of photography. It'll be interesting to see like how I navigate that. And I think I have to call some of my friends and I have to role play, because I think that's the only way that I will try to figure out what words to say.
It's so hard to think of the right thing to say at the right moment to advocate for yourself. And I do think that like people of color don't talk about that enough, because, you know, I think that we're put in these situations where we're meant to confront our existence and how, you know, maybe we're not being treated fairly. But I just always feel in those moments that I'm so paralyzed, I don't know what to say. And then hours later, I think of what I should have said, and that moment's gone, you know?
So maybe
I
that's
think role playing is awesome.
Yeah, of role playing. But that's where I am. I've stopped crying spontaneously. So that's good.
I'm interested though, when you said that you were being more collaborative before and that you're just like, I'm not doing that anymore. Like, what are you referring to specifically?
Well, anyone who hasn't seen me and anyone who talks with me on the phone, apparently I don't talk like a Black person. I don't know what that means, but I don't talk like a Black person. My CV is very impressive. My name sounds French. It doesn't sound Black.
That's right, yeah.
And so people never know what to make of me. And when they meet me, they want to know, oh, where are you from? None of your business. That's where I'm from.
Right.
None of your business. If we don't have a Skype meeting or a Zoom meeting and we go straight to meet in person, they're always very shocked. And it's kind of like, you know, if someone throws water in your face, you react, you can't stop that reaction.
Right.
And it happens so often, Danielle, that what ends up happening after I see this look on their face, I have to put them at ease.
Right. Yeah.
I have to.
You've been conditioned to do that.
I'm a Black person. I'm a professional Black person. Look at what I'm wearing. I'm wearing DVF, and look at my fancy Jimmy Choo shoes. So even the clothes that I've purchased are communicate a thing about me, right?
Right. Yes. Yes.
Whereas
I think that Asians use that tool as well to like sort of signal that they should be treated like they're a part of a certain slice of society, for sure. But, you know, we shouldn't have to feel like we need to compensate.
Exactly. I mean, if I were, and I could tell you, like, if I were white and going to those meetings, I know exactly how I should dress, because there's a white girl way of dressing, right? Like the cool white girl way of dressing. I need to have my like LA California hat on. I need to have like a white t-shirt, I guess acid wash mom jeans, and then preferably Chuck Taylors or Pour La Victoire white fashion sneakers. Like I know this code. I know how they all dress, and I know that like how I should dress, but I can't dress like that. Or at least I thought that I had to dress more uptown, if you will. And then the first 10 minutes of the meeting is putting them at ease. I have to be really witty. I have to be really funny. I have to be charming. And those are my tool set of things that I've used to put people at ease, to know, yes, I deserve this job. Yes, I can do this.
I mean, I would even challenge the language that you're using around it to like say, oh, are you putting them at ease, or are you trying to prove that you deserve a seat or that you belong with them? Because I feel like, you know, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I think about it the same way too. And, you know, I think that as women too, we're especially like pressured to make other people feel comfortable around us. You know, like that is totally not a service that we should provide anymore.
I agree with you. And to answer your question, I think it's both. I do both. And maybe it's by virtue of being a Black woman, being a Black person and a Black woman, but that's not my problem. Like,
Right.
not my problem. It's your problem. You deal with it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and yeah, when people ask you where you're from and, to just start saying, why are you asking me? And if they say, well, I'm interested, I'll be like, well, why are you interested? And really, the answer to that is because I look different. Even if you think that you're being polite and interested, to me, you're pointing out what I can't hide from. This is something that I can't escape from in my life. So thank you for reminding me of it again. And please be mindful of how you're using this question to make other people feel like they don't belong.
I like that. We should include that in our role play.
yeah, totally. Where are you from? Oh, why do you ask?
I have to say, like, when we chatted the first time, I asked you if you were born in this country, and then replaying our conversation, I was like, I shouldn't have asked her. But I think I asked you from the viewpoint of there's an immigrant experience.
Oh, that's how
that
I totally
is so
received
singular.
that question.
Yeah.
Too.
Like immigrants are
Yeah.
just, they think about the US in a different way, and they can see the fabric of the country in a different way than I think people who are several generations here.
Totally. And I think that my parents are definitely in a camp where they see this world differently than I do, because they came over here, they grew up in a society where they belong. They actually achieved their goals here too. And so they're successful now. And I think that, they're more vulnerable to thinking that because of that success that they actually do belong here. Whereas people like me who grew up here, I'm never going to have that sort of fantasy. I'm never going to, suffer under that impression that I do belong or that I have done enough to be treated equally. I think that a lot of successful Asian immigrants think that they're exempt from this issue.
It's interesting that you said that, because when I was getting my master's, I did a qualitative study on this very topic in terms of trying to figure out resiliency in immigrants.
Yeah.
And what I found out, and I forget how many people I interviewed, but one of the things that came clear was the difference between first generation, second generation, and third generation immigrants. And there was this academically, second and third generations, they don't do as well. Academically, they earn less and so on. And what I deduced, now I don't know if there must have been subsequent studies that have covered this, but I think that in subsequent generations, they don't have the rose-colored glasses anymore. The subsequent generations, they no longer have the rose-colored glasses. The emperor has no clothes. So oftentimes, they see that there's no point really. And so
Definitely.
Because of that, there's, I guess, less of an impetus to try to live the American dream.
Right. I think that it's a major disadvantage to have the knowledge that the game is rigged against you. I mean, I think as an immigrant, if you come over here, you've heard all about the American dream and how if you just work hard, you'll succeed. And that's a much simpler way to look at it. Yeah, I just think it's really complicated, like the differences between the generations. And
so I would love to see if there's anything else that you would like to add.
I feel like, just about those small racist experiences that I have, one thing that I have noticed about how it affects me, and if I say this and it affects someone in a different way and that maybe they move through the world more positively, that would be a good thing. But I feel like whenever stuff like that happens, I'm also very introverted. I live and I work in my home, and, especially after that thing happened, and then I have these racist experiences in the world, it causes me to be more agoraphobic. The idea of leaving my house, it just seems so much more unnecessary, or I don't know. I am a very sensitive person too. And so when stuff like this happens to me, even without restrictions or whatever, sometimes I won't leave my house for 2 weeks, again, to think of it as a microaggression. I'm reading that book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, right now. And I love how the author Ibram, he talks about how microaggressions, he hates that term because it doesn't feel micro at all. And we should just call it what it is. It's an aggression and it's racist. And we don't have to couch these ideas of racism behind other supplemental terms like systemic. It's like, it's just racist. Like, let's just move past the jargon and be like, it's not micro. It's like, that was a racist aggression. Like, and it definitely affects me in a deep way where I don't want to interact with the world anymore. You know, like I would rather just stay safe inside and shelter myself. But I don't think that's good for anybody, you know, but I do just sort of retreat, and I don't go out for a while after stuff like that happens.
It's so sad. It's just so sad that we have to think that way.
But it's what you were saying, right? It's like when the tank is empty, it's like empty, and like you can't go out and like risk it. I don't know where else it would go, but you're just like, I can't experience anything damaging anymore, you know? So I'm just gonna stay inside. I'm gonna stay safe inside where no one can get to me.
Well, next time that happens, feel free. We'll have long-winded conversation about glaze. I will listen to you talk about glaze. Danielle, thank you so much for joining us. What's the best way that our listeners can get in touch with you and learn more about Monsoon Pottery?
I have a website, monsoonpottery.com. You can contact me directly through the contact form on that website. And I'm also very active on Instagram. Follow Monsoon Pottery. Hang out with me there.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Martine. This was an amazing conversation.